Write it on a piece of paper, put it on the wall in the basement.
Well, now I have it on my WhatsApp.
You had it on your WhatsApp before, but you have to
But
find
now
it.
I have it more recently. Thank you very much. Oh, geweldig. Okay. Amr Lahem Hamamuna. So we are up to the parak that starts off the activities first thing in the morning on Yom Kippur morning. So Amr Lahem Hamamuna. The Mamuna is the Shiloh. This was the Rashi says it was the Skan Kohen Gadol, the second in command. And he said, "Tzu, go out, and check it out. In Megia Zman Hashchita. At the time for the Shchita started. Where am I supposed to go look? Zokt Rashi ala chayma or ala gag. Go up to the roof, the top of the wall or the roof of the Beis Hamikdash. There you could see further, and you could see if the sun is coming over the horizon, and see if the Zman Hashchita came. Shchita Satomid.
Didn't they have a loop that was sent out? I would think the Beis Hamikdash would have something like that. All right.
It could be that a little bit. The guy didn't have a good watch. They didn't have the satellite watches that we have today. So he would go up and he would see if it was light. And we learned yesterday that the reason why they didn't ask him to check out to see if it's light so that they could put on the Shnei Gizra Eitzim, although that also had to be done when it was light, but that you could do again if you did it too early. But if you shechted the tumah too early, it's an irrevocable problem. It's a non-correctable problem. So shchita is a tumah klavim her amizach shchita psula b'layla k'dichsiv b'yoyim zevchachem. So what would happen? Her roya, the roya means the guy Jesha Alul Agag, the guy who climbed up on the roof. He would say barkoi, meaning lashon tzoyar. It's a lashon of light. Kamoy leman hoyla barak, hiru barakim, which are all referring to flashes of light. Masi ben Shmuel Eimer. There's actually a shaila if Masi ben Shmuel is just a Tana saying his opinion of what occurred, or if Masi ben Shmuel was actually one of the announcers. He was one of the Mamunim, and it's saying what he used to say when he was in that position. So Masi ben Shmuel Eimer, Heyer Pinei Kola Mizach Ache Bechevron. So he didn't just ask, is it light? He asked a very specific question. Is it light all the way that you could see into Chevron? And Rashi says, Achu Bechevron, Achenir Hatzoyer at Chevron, you could see the light until Chevron. Now, I don't understand this. Maybe you can help me. If I remember correctly, Chevron is south of Yerushalayim, not west of Yerushalayim.
That's right.
So if it's light in Yerushalayim, why wouldn't it be light in Chevron? I would understand that further west it might not be light, but further south, why would your latitude impact how light it would be? I don't know the answer. Anyone speaks about it.
I think it's south, but it's a little bit east actually of.
So if it's southeast, then for sure it would be light even before Yerushalayim.
That's right. I don't know.
Now that we have to go in such a roundabout route, I lose my sense of directions when I go to Hebron because they go around certain cities in walled corridors.
Right. You could look at the map.
And, I never thought of that. So it's very interesting.
And what did they do on a cloudy day? And,
the Gemara is going to deal with that. Oh, wow. These are all the right questions. You're pushing all the right buttons.
Yeah.
So let's talk about Chevron. So one of the reasons why it's brought down Chevron is not because it would be lighter earlier or later. Chevron is where our forefathers are buried. Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov are buried there. So the reason why I mentioned Hebron was, in fact, not because it's geographically a place that will prove that it's light enough. Rather, it's because and it's a shiloh if this is every day or if it's only on Yom Kippur that he said this. But for sure on Yom Kippur, before we start to avodah, we want to remind the Rebbeinu Shalom of the Sheinei Chevron of our avos that are in Chevron, and that's why we mention Chevron. And that's also the reason why we start off our Shmoyne Esrei all the time with Elkei Avram, Elkei Yitzchak, and Elkei Yaakov. Now, Relevant spoke on a story that the Gra had a Talmud that wrote a parish on the Siddur, and he came to the Gra to ask for a skama. And the Gra opened up the Siddur, and the first tefillah there after Matayv was Adonai Olam, and his Talmud wrote, the reason why we start with Adonai Olam is because the first person in the history of the world that referred to the Rebbeinu Shalom as an Adon, as the master of the world, was Avraham Avinu. So the Gra says, If that's what you're writing, I don't need to look any further. I already like your sefer, and I'm prepared to give you haskama based on that alone. So again, the Mamuna would say, is that light all the way to Chevron? Who Aimer Hain, and he would answer back yes. And the Gemara is going to give us different option of how this conversation went. But for the Pashas, we'll learn now that the guy up on the roof answered Hain. Rashi says the Farish the Gemara, because in fact the Gemara has two options of who said the yes. I touched it that the fellow on the roof gave the yes, but there's a shita that learns that the fellow at the bottom, the Mamuna, said yes, and the question is, what did he say yes to? Why did they have to lalois lagag velirais? Why can't they just use the time in the loop? Why did they have to actually climb up on the roof to see if the light came up over the horizon? So Gemara, Shapar Machas, morning, Shapar Machas, Ola Ma'or Halavana, the light of the Lavana came up, which means Semach Toyer Halavana, the rays of the moon were shining, Samach L'Shachris, right before daybreak. Vidimu, and they thought Shaher Mizrach, that it was actually already light. The Shacht was atomic, and they shachted the atomic prematurely. They had to burn it, Rashi says, once they realized that they were fooled, and the glow that they saw at the horizon was not the sun, rather the glow was the moon, they had to burn the carbon. Now the question is, if you're up on the wall or on top of the Beis Hamikdash, why would you be able to discern whether it's the moonlight or the sunlight? That again, I think, is going to become clear when we learn the Gemara. Zog the Gemara weiter. Oh, before we go weiter, it's another interesting thing to point out is there they seem to have started by Alois HaShachar. We start everything at Netzach Hama. There they started everything at Alois HaShachar. So Rabbi Elvin points out that there, when they had a higher degree of precision, they were able to start even earlier. We, to make sure that we're taka at day, we wait till Netzach Hama. Haridu Kohen Gadol leveset tefillah. What is the very first thing that they did? They had the Kohen Gadol go to the mikveh, which was part of his wake-up routine. Zaklal, hoya b'mikta, zaklal hoya b'mikdash. This was a rule that happened in the Beis Hamikdash. Kol ha-mesach ha-shraklav, anyone that relieved himself with a bowel movement, we'll call it, ton tvila, must go to the mikveh. V'chol ha-matal mayim, and if somebody merely goes number one, ton kiddush yadayim v'reglayim. The Mefarshim speak out that there were 5 tvilos that the Kohen Gadol had to do on Yom Kippur. And the 5 tvilos that he had to do on Yom Kippur had to start from the morning of Yom Kippur. So if the Kohen Gadol got up extra early when it was still dark and he went to the bathroom, and like at our age, we already know what it means to go to the bathroom before daybreak, right? And then he went to the mikveh, that wouldn't count. He would actually have to go to the mikveh again once there was daybreak, because the tevilas had to occur by day. Now, I don't normally like delving in to bathroom issues, but Rashi explains why does going to the bathroom mean mesach, and it seems like in those days they didn't have toilets like we have that are so comfortable. It seemed like in those days everybody used the bathroom like they do in China today by simply squatting. Because Rashi explains, what does Mesach Raglav mean? It means Nakav Magdolim. Where did the word Mesach come from? Veloshin Mesach is Kama Ilan HaMesach Al Oretz, a big canopy of a tree that's hovering over and shading the ground below it. What does that have to do with going to the bathroom? He squats. When someone squats, his body is covering over his legs. So that's what it means. Mesach Raglav, he covers his legs, which clearly means that they didn't have normal toilets. They just squatted in the air. There was a cave there. So you see, that was the way they did things in those days. Is they just squatted, and therefore it was called Mesach Raglav. And Kiddush Yadayim was Minakir. We know that was from the water of the Kir. Tanya, we learned. What they said was Barak Barkoi. There's a ray of light which is the earliest stage of seeing some glimmer of light from the horizon. Rabbi Kiva Omer Allah Barkoi. It's the Barkoi came up, and Rashi says that Heyer Yosy Barak. So Allah is a little bit more light than the Barak Barkoi. The Chuma ben Afkashion Omer Af Barkoi beChevron. It's also light in Chevron. Basi ben Shmuel Omer Hamamuna ala Paisis Omer. So here it's very, very interesting. So if you say Masha ben Shmuel Omer Hamamuna ala Paisis, that's Masha ben Shmuel the Tana telling us what the Mamuna ala Paisis did. But if you don't go to it Omer, it's Masha ben Shmuel who he himself was Hamamuna ala Paisis. Omer he would say Heyer Penei Kala Mizrach Asher beChevron, which is even lighter. So I guess these are different stages of the rays of the sun rising up to light up the day. Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira Omer, Rabbi Yehuda ben Beseira said, Heyer Penei Kol HaMizrach Ad beChevron. The whole Mizrach lit up until Chevron, and V'yatzu Kol Ha'am Ish L'Malachtai, and everybody already went to work. Fact the Gemara, Ihachi Naga Latuva. When the people already go out to work, that's after Netzachama, that's when it's really light. That's much later in the day, and that cannot be what we're referring to. So Gemara, Liskar Pilam Kamrinan. We're not talking about the point when the workers go out to work. We're talking about the point when the employers went looking for workers. I guess there was a lot of day workers. They just worked for the day, and they used to congregate somewhere, I guess. And that's the time when the employers would look around to find the workers, which will be before the day starts, because by the time the day starts, the workers have to be hired and deployed already. So we're not talking about the workers themselves are leaving to work at that point. We're talking about the Balabais who gets up before all the workers to find workers to deploy for the day. Amr Rav Safra said, Shaloi said Avram, the Tefillah of Avram, and Rashi says it's referring to Tefillah's Ha'erev Shaloi, his mincha. Avram's mincha was Mechimashchri Koisley. It's when the walls start to create a small shade on the east side of those walls. Rashi explains what that means. Mechimashchri Koisley. Choymes HaPoinos LeMizrach. If you have a wall that runs north-south, so it creates a shade for the sun moving from east to west. Shehelbinu me'enetzachama. The moment the sun rises, these eastern walls are all lit up because the sun haba min hamizrach, like any big condo tower on Miami Beach. That's right there on the east. The moment the sun comes up, the entire wall, the eastern face of the building is completely lit up because the sun's shining on it. However, but at noon hour, which is when the 7th hour begins, where the sun is directly above, when we have high noon, there is no shadow, not to the east, not to the west. Rather, the shadow is directly below this wall. Because at that point the sun is directly overhead, on its thickness. And once the sun moves a little bit to the west, now there's a little bit of a shade on the east side of the building or of the wall. So we're calling that Erev because that's when the sun moves to the west side of the horizon, and now there's a slight shade on the east side. Oh, beautiful. I was waiting for you to ask the question because I didn't want to ask it. I just wanted to answer it. And it scratches much better if it itches. Oh, so Frek Mechi, isn't Minche known to be the Tefillah of Yitzchak, not the Tefillah of Avram? So there's a couple of different answers Rabbi Elfin spoke out. One of the things he said was, although Yitzchak was Miyased Mincha, Avram also davened Mincha. Maybe after Yitzchak was Miyased, so we're calling it Shlosh Avram, but still a little bit difficult. Then he said that Avram Avinu avada daven mincha. What Yitzchak did, that he was masakin that it should be widespread, that everyone should daven mincha. But avada Avram Avinu daven mincha. And the last shot that I heard that was very, very nice. I just want to clarify it in my mind because it could be it's negated to the Gemara a little bit later. Let me just think. Yeah, I want to wait a little bit and we'll get back to it. What the third shot
Vada,
is
he
very,
wears
very smart.
Dremel also, probably. Yeah, Vada, he would go without his Dremel on Shabbos.
Right, that's right.
Right.
But he lived in the Middle East. It was very hot there. I'm not sure. You know, in Poland in the winter, it's one thing. Rabbi Yosef, Anan me Avram Nekim v'Nigbar. Are we going to base our standards based on Avram Avinu? Anan me Avram Nekim v'Nigbar. Basel and Bednu is reason Avram. We can't be Azores like Avram. Rava, why not? Tana Gomer me Avram. The Tana learns from Avram. Anan loy Gamrina minei. And we won't learn from Avram. The Tanya we learned. Uvayoyim Hashmini Yima el Besar Elosai. Melamed Shekol Yom Kosher LeMila. Meikar Adin. You could make Mila anytime during the 8th day. Ella shas reason makdimin lemitzvos. This reason start early. Shenemar vayashkem Avram baboiker. Avram got up early. Vayachvosh. So you see, in fact, that we do learn halacha lemaisa from Avram Avinu. Ella amarava Rabbi Yosef hakakal shalei. This was the difficulty that Rabbi Yosef had. That none. Chal arvei psachim liyos be'erev Shabbos. We learned in psachim that if erev Shabbos was also Erev Pesach, and because of that, we had to rush up and make the Korban Pesach as early as possible, because people had to have it completely roasted before nightfall, because once nightfall arrives at Shabbos, and you're no longer allowed to roast your Korban Pesach. So therefore, they had to rush things up and do things earlier. So the Korban Tamid was Nishchat B'Sheshu Mechza. It was shechted as early as possible, when 6.5 hours. The Korban B'Shevel Mechza. So the question is, why would you wait till 6.5 hours if we're learning that the moment the sun is creating a little bit of shade on the eastern horizon, well, that would be 12:01, 12:02. But why would you have to wait till 12:30? And that's the Gemara's kasha. The Gemara's kasha is how could we learn from Avram Avinu, where you see that in the Beis HaMikdash they waited the next half hour? Zok Gemara, my kasha. V'dilma kaisla the Beis Hamikdash b'sheishu mechshri mishum delay mechav tuva. Maybe the walls of the Beis Hamikdash were not a straight up wall; they were built like a pyramid. Like you see that the lowest row of stones is much wider than the top row of stones. They got thinner as they went up. So that therefore you won't see any shade on the ground until the sun moved past the noon hour, because the wall itself gets wider as it goes down. Inami, or another reason why it was different, why Avram was different, is shiny Avram did stagninus kedola ha'ishablivai. Avram had a tremendous professionalism. He was a bookie in how the sun works, so he could be precise to know exactly when to start. But us, we need a little bit more time. We need to leave some wiggle room to make sure that we don't daven mincha too early. Inami mishum dezokin v'yoshev v'yeshiva haba. Or maybe because Avram Avinu was a Zokan v'Yosef v'Yeshiva, and he had special Siyata D'Shmaya that he would end up doing it at the right time. Okay, let's see Rashi, and then we have a lot to discuss over here. So, Zok the Gemara, Chol Yos be'erev Shabbos, Hutzrach l'mayer Talmud shel Bein Arbaim b'chol yicholos. They had to rush up the Talmud shel Bein Arbaim as much as possible. Levisha psachim nishchotel macharov. The Korban Pesach was shechted after the Talmud shel Bein Arbaim. And they still have to roast it before Shabbos arrives. Armenian Hasam, we go to the earliest possible time to do the Korban Tamid, as soon as the shade is on the eastern horizon. The Katani, and what is the earliest time that we say? You first can check the Tamid only at 6.5 hours. The Mikri Bein Harbayim. And if you're telling me that it's called Bein Harbayim like Avram Avinu, the moment the horizon, the moment the shade is slightly on the east side, you should be able to check at that point as well, not wait a full half hour. At 6:01, maybe the walls of the Beis Hamikdash were not straight up. Loy mechavni. Loy havi zakufim betzimtzum. They weren't perfectly straight, using a plumb line. The walls are built like a pyramid. Indeed, we see that as well. Every row of the kaisel is a little bit narrower than the row above it. Therefore, the shadow will not show up on the ground until the chama moves a little bit more to the west. And they had to be sure that the shadow would be on the ground on the east side of the wall, and therefore they had to wait a little bit extra time. And they couldn't do it.
How's the size of the bricks affect the shadow?
Because if you think about it, let's say at 1202, the shadow would be 6 inches from the base of the wall, right? But if the base of the wall sticks out 6 inches because it's wider than the top, so the shadow will still be on the base of the wall, not yet on the ground, because the bottom brick is bigger than the top brick. So the top brick is what obstructs the sun.
But it's not on an angle. It doesn't stick out more or less.
It would be, if the wall is built like a pyramid, then the wall is on an angle.
But
the wall doesn't go straight up.
That's what Rashi said, not Rashi. That's what the Gemara is suggesting. It was built like a pyramid.
It's true. Actually, the walls of the base of English were built like a pyramid. I mean,
So
the
walls were on an angle?
No, it's built like a pyramid, which means the bottom brick, in order that it shouldn't topple, the bottom brick is actually wider than the second row, and the second row is wider than so every row up, actually the wall's getting thinner and thinner.
The actual
and at the top,
wall
it's micro thin. It's only like 12 feet deep.
Well, the bricks are smaller, but it's still
David,
If the bricks are smaller, so it's going to be like a pyramid. The bottom brick is like this, and then it goes up like
no,
this.
there's just more bricks, and they're just
more bricks.
no, David.
instead of having one big brick, you have 4 small bricks. They're not angled.
David, each brick was offset 2 inches with it inside from the brick below it.
So if the bottom brick was, let's say, 5 feet wide by 3 feet deep, the second brick would be 5 feet wide by 2.5 feet deep. And the wall was actually got thinner and thinner as you went up.
Have you ever seen a picture of the base of English as a pyramid?
Well, you actually see it live. You actually see it live by the coastal. You actually see that each consecutive row is actually, the brick is actually smaller.
I know,
the brick is
going,
it's not on an angle.
like an angle.
It actually is. If you look at a side profile of the coastal, you would actually see that it's going like this.
Okay, I guess very gradual.
It has to be true. That's what my tour guide said.
Yeah.
I guess it's very gradual, and you don't really notice it when you look.
That's right. You don't notice it, but it's definitely that way. If you look at it closely, it's not leaning. Yet, if you stand by the coastal, you'll actually see every brick is a little bit set back deeper in than the brick above it, and it's that way on the other side as well. So, in fact, the wall is like a pyramid.
Never
So
noticed.
that's why when the sun comes over it,
it's like steps almost, because each course of bricks, the one above the one below it, was offset 2 inches in, or 1 or 2 inches within from the one below it.
that's right. But it's not almost like a set of steps, because a set of steps on the other side, it's leaning in. Here on both sides, it looked that way because it was getting narrow as it went up. It was like an A-frame ladder. It looks like an A-frame ladder.
Right, but it was filled in with earth, so you didn't see it from the other side.
That's right. Exactly. We don't go on that side either. But we know for us, if we ever have to drill through the wall, we like drilling through the wall at the narrowest point. So if we would have to ever drill through the coastal to run a pipe, we would do it at the top. It would be a lot less work. Yeah. So that's why the shade was that way.
Yeah. The said that it starts on the wall of the construction, not the base of the floor.
No, it's when the shade of the wall is visible on the ground. When the shade of the wall is visible on the ground, and since the base of the wall is wider, the shade of the wall would not be visible on the ground until a little bit later. Oh, we did that already. Okay, it's Tagninus. Avraham Avinu is a baki in how the sun and stars work. In astrology, He knew exactly how everything worked, and when the hour started. Which means it's Tagninus Gedoyla Hoysa Beliboy. That's what Lakoil means. He had a huge chachma. All of the kings from east and west would come to his door, Lishol B'Mazolos, to ask him about his knowledge of Mazolos.
Another place is the son.
A daughter, it's called son, a daughter, it's riches, it's a Bakar means everything. It's a lot of good different. It's a lot of different good things. So the question is: we daven mincha gedoyla, a half hour after shkia, right? I'm sorry, a half hour after chatzos, right? So we wait a half hour. But there's a big shaila. When is the best time to daven mincha? Are you better off davening mincha gedoyla, or are you better off davening mincha ketana? The Shlomo brings down from the Arizal that the Arizal actually was marked with the daven mincha ketana, closer to shkia. When is the better time to daven? So, answer your question: why is it called the mincha of Avram? Is because Avram Avinu was marked with, he held it's better to daven mincha gedoyla, and that's why it's called Tlos of Avram, because we're talking about mincha gedoyla. Yitzchak was a Masach mincha, but Yitzchak davened mincha later in the afternoon. He davened mincha ketana. So we're calling it Tlos of Avram because we're talking about mincha gedoyla and not mincha ketana. That's the most geschmack of pshat. The way you know that's the most geschmack of pshat is a pshat that spontaneously elicits a smile, means, oh, that's right on. That, and I also smiled when I heard it. So that it's called Tlos of Avram because we're talking about mincha gedoyla. Okay, Zok to Gemara weiter. Or another shaila is, what does it mean? This reason makdim in mitzvahs. As an agav by mila, it's not. There's a shaila. Is reason makdim in mitzvahs. Is it still a good thing, or is it actually halacha l'maisa? You're supposed to. So most people learn that it's mamish halacha l'maisa, and the halacha is if someone is making a bris, and he has the choice of making the bris first thing in the morning, but he's only going to have a minyan, he'll only have 10 people, or he could wait a couple of hours and then he'll have a big crowd. So Alt Baram Avadris Melech, maybe one should wait, but the place can paskin avadi, you should make it early in the morning because reason makdim al mitzvahs is the most important thing. Another thing is, if you think about the wording, reason makdim al mitzvahs doesn't make sense. It should be reason makdim in ha mitzvahs. Reason want to make the mitzvahs as early as possible. What do you mean? Reason makdim al mitzvahs. They're makdim before the mitzvah. What does that mean? So I think you quoted from the Avnei Nezer that we're talking about this reason do hachana for the mitzvah. So getting up early to be meichen for the mitzvah, even though the mitzvah will be done at a regular time, the hachana is also what it's referring to is reason makdim and mitzvahs. Is reason get up early to make hachanas to do mitzvahs. He probably meant going to the mikveh before davening or whatever. Okay, so let's see what the Gemara says weiter. Let's see what the Gemara says weiter. Inami shiny Avram tzavnis gedoyla hoysa beliba inami dezaken v'yosef v'yeshiva, and that's why he did it so early. And Rabbi Yosef was asking, who said that we should also start so early? The Amar Abchama Bar Chanina, Mimein Shalav Yisenu, from the days of our fathers, Parsha Yeshiva Mehem. They always had yeshiva. The very first, we call sitting and learning in school, we call it yeshiva. A learning is called yeshiva. It comes from Avram Avinu. And it's brought down, the reason why it's called yeshiva is because learning Torah is what allows the world to have its continuity. So if someone who's learning in yeshiva, he's oisik b'yeshivas shalaylam. Learning is keeping the world inhabited. I remember there's a fellow that people remember here from Toronto who fought extradition to the United States for many years. Eventually, the U.S. Department of Justice got him, and he actually sat in jail. So I remember speaking to his son, and I asked him, "How's your father?" He says, "Oh, my father's in yeshiva." So that's a nice word to describe an unfortunate circumstance. But yeshiva means sitting and learning Torah. Zok to Gemara weiter. The word zaken, v'yosef yeshiva means that he was a Talmid Chacham. It doesn't just mean old. It means someone who sits and learns, and someone who's Talmid Chacham. And it's brought down that until Avram Avinu's time, there was no such thing as aging. And what happened was people would get mixed up between Yitzchak and Avram because they looked alike and they both looked the same age. Avram Avinu davened that there should be something called zikna. Why? Because he wanted people to come and consult with him since he was a zaken and he was already he was already developed and learning, and he was Oiskar, but he was at the point where now he can go, where now he could give over. So we asked for Zikna because his old age would attract people to come to ask him for his wisdom. And what we learned from here is that people think, okay, I worked hard my whole life and now I can relax, I can retire. Adrabah, once someone becomes a Zokin, at that point, he has to start giving over to others. And at that point, he has a whole different job. He doesn't have to work for himself anymore, but now he has to be available to answer and to help other people grow. They always had to learn in yeshiva. Mitzrayim, they had a yeshiva. Shenemar Leich v'Asavta is Zikna Yisrael, and Zikna is always referring to sitting and learning Torah. Hoyva Midbar, once again yeshiva imayim, even in the middle they had yeshiva. Shenemar Esveli Shivim Ish Mi Zikna Yisrael. Get me 70 people who are sitting and learning. Avram Avinu was a Zokin v'Yoshev v'Yeshiva Hava. Shenemar Avram Zokin Baba Yomim. Yitzchak Avinu was a Zokin v'Yoshev v'Yeshiva Haya. Shenemar v'Yiki Zokin Yitzchak. When Yitzchak got old, Zokin refers to somebody who's developed in Torah. Yaakov Avinu Zokin v'Yoshev v'Yeshiva Haya. Shenemar v'Einu Yisrael Kovdu Mizokin. Eliezer Evan Avram was also a Zokin v'Yoshev v'Yeshiva Haya. Shenemar v'Yomer Avram al Adoi Zakan Beisai HaMoshel who mastered B'chol HaShaloi. What does it mean? He mastered everything that his other that Avram Avinu had. He mastered his Rebbe's Torah, and it says who Damesek Eliezer. He was referred to as Damesek Eliezer, and the word Damesek is a contrition of two words together. Omar Belazer Shadoila. He sheps, he draws. Umashkin drinks. He gives to drink to others. Mitarasa shel Rabbi lacherim, from the Torah of his Rebbe to others. Rashi Doila Mashka is Nutrikon Shel Damesek. That's what the it's a contraction of two words. Amarav Kaim Avram Avinu Kol HaTorah Kula. Avram Avinu was Makayim the whole Torah. Shenemar Ekev Asher Shama Avram B'Koili. Amar Lei Rapsimi Bar Chiel Rav, who said from there that he was Makayim everything. The Ema Sheva Mitzvahs. Maybe Avram Avinu was just Makayim the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach. We know he did more than the Sheva Mitzvahs because we know Avram Avinu did Mila. So you still don't have a ride that is Mekayim Kol HaTorah Kula. Sheva Mitzvahs Umila. Maybe the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nei Noach and Mila. Amalei, he answered back, Imkain, it says in the pasuk. Let's read the pasuk. It's a beautiful pasuk. Yud over here. Ekev Asher Shama Avram B'Koili. The Yishwar Mishmarti Mitzvosai Chukoisai V'Sayroisai. That doesn't just sound like the bare minimum of 7. That means everything. Obviously, it meant that Avram Avinu was Makayim Kol HaTorah Kula. Amiravi Temer Vashi, Kaim Avram Avinu, Afilu Erev Tavshilin, even Erev Tavshilin, and the significance of that, Zokt Rashi, is She'ena Halacha Moshe Messinai. It's not even a deraisa as a Halacha Moshe Messinai, Elotakana Soifrim Shasitin Lasakin. It's merely a derabanan, even that he was Makayim. Shnemer Torah, my Torah is plural. Achas Torah Shabbat, Achas Torah Shabbat. So there's a whole bunch of Torah on this. Like, how could Avram Avinu have been Mekabel Kol HaTorah Kula, have been Mekayim Kol HaTorah Kula? It's a goy that keeps Shabbos is Chayv Misa. So how could he keep Shabbos? Oh, so that's going to be a whole shaila. So first of all all these yeshivas that they had, they didn't have the Torah yet. So what exactly were they learning in yeshiva? So the Mepharshim say that they were learning Midas Toifus. They were learning Musar. That's what they learned in yeshiva because they didn't have Lomdus yet. They didn't have Chaim Briskers yet. That's number one. Avram Avinu, there's a famous story about a ger who was practicing all the mitzvahs, and someone told him, "How could you practice all the mitzvahs? How could you keep Shabbos? You're not allowed to keep Shabbos. You're a goy now. You're not a ger yet. And if you keep Shabbos, you have Misa." So he says, No, I wear my gloves. I wear my gloves on Shabbos. So they told me, yeah, but there's an Erev. He says, nah, I don't hold an Erev. So that's how he was Yotze, not keeping Shabbos. So the Mefarshim struggle with Avram Avinu. I kept all the mitzvahs. So brought down, he did certain malachas that would only be a malacha for a goy, not for each. For instance, we know that on Shabbos you're allowed to do the most difficult labor. You can lift 1,000-pound weights and bring them around your house, and there's no issue there. However, if you take a feather from one rishus to another rishus, you're going to be chayav for itzah.
Yes.
Those halachas of Shabbos only apply to a goy, to a yid. A goy is not allowed to do hard work. That would be the goy Shabbos. So Mamela, he lifted heavy weights, but he didn't carry him out. For a goy rest, the definition of rest for a goy is hard work, not the lumdische halachic definition. So therefore, Avram Avinu would lift big weights on Shabbos, which technically didn't violate Shabbos as a yid, but he didn't rest. Another thing they say is, I'm sorry.
No, so sorry. Just so his whole life, or after a certain point, after Mila, he was considered a yid.
No, if you hold that he wasn't considered a yid, even after Mila, then these are the things he did. He wore gloves in the Erev and he didn't hold an Erev, like these types of affairs. Or there are those ones that are very interesting that until we got to Torah, I didn't know this. Until we got to Torah, the Jewish day was from midnight to midnight, and it's only by Eden that it's from nightfall to nightfall. So Avram Avinu kept Shabbos, but he kept it from midnight to midnight. So Vaiter didn't keep it like Yid. That's another pshat they say. Another pshat they say is this halacha that a goy who's keeps Shabbos as chayv misa, that also was only given after Matan Torah. So before Matan Torah, a goy was allowed to keep Shabbos. But halachically, when they kept the day, I mean, we're not talking about how the world was created. The world was not created by Erev, but
we learn out the whole thing as being Erev. We don't know days, consider days.
Right, because it says that in the Torah.
Right,
but before the Torah was given, it didn't say Vayir Vayir. I mean, these are all Torahs. Okay, so let's see. Now the other thing is, what's up is Erev Tefshilin? And of all the derabbanans, what's up is Erev Tefshilin? So we know how does Erev Tefshilin work? You're not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos, right? You're not allowed to cook from Yom Tov to Shabbos. What's the heter of Erev Tefshilin? Because if I'm cooking on Yom Tov, you say Dilma Ikloy Archim. I'm cooking extra because I might have guests. If I have guests, then I have to cook. What if you're a guy who never ever have guests? It will be a little difficult to argue Dilma Ikloy Archim. But Avram Avinu always had guests. So Erev Tefshilin is a perfect type of halacha for Avram Avinu because he was someone who always had guests. There are different Gersoyes who learn that it never said Erev Tefshilin. It's actually a mistake. It said Ayin Tov, Rosh Tevis, and it could be an Erev Tchumen. And the other pshat that some people learn is that it was Basar B'Cholov. And Eruve Tefshilin means when different foods get mixed together, and it's referring to a deraisa that Avram Avinu was Makayim the Yisur of Basar B'Cholov. That's right. That's a good point. Of all things to say. Okay, so Gemara weiter. Masih bin Shmuel Omer, Hu Omer Hein. So the Gemara wants to man Omer Hein. Who answered Hein at the end of this conversation? Ilema Hach the Koya Igra. If it's the fellow who was up there, that doesn't make sense. Who Cholav Hu Mafsher? He had a dream and he interpreted the dream. In other words, he asked the question until Chevron, and then he answered yes. It doesn't make sense. Allah Hach the Koya Ara. It must be that the guy at the bottom was answering. The guy at the top said up until Chevron, and he answered back yes. But the question is Minay Yoda. How does the guy at the bottom know if it's light until Chevron if he's at the bottom? I can explain the conversation based on saying that the person at the bottom said yes. Or I can explain the conversation based on the fellow up on top saying yes. So let's look at the conversation. Amar Iyu. Up on top, the fellow on the roof said, "Hey, hey, everybody, it's light." Well, Amar Hach the Kaya Ara. So the guy at the bottom says, "I know it's light, but is it light Acha B'Chevron? Is it even light all the way up to Chevron?" And on that, the fellow on top answered, "Amar Hein," and he answered back, "Yes." That's one option of how the conversation went. The boy said, "Hach the Kaya Ara," or maybe the guy at the bottom said yes. And what was the conversation? Amar Iyu, Hey, Pnei Kala Mizrach. The guy at the bottom calls to the guy on top. Did it light up already? And the guy said, do you mean that not only did it light up, do you mean to say it has to be lit up until Chevron? And the guy at the bottom says, yes, that's what I mean. I want to know if it's light up until Chevron. So just two different ways of reading the conversation. Why did they need to make it so light? Why was it such a big deal? It's because if they shech the carbon tumid too early, it leads to a puzzle of carbon tumid. Zok Gemara, is it so easy to make that mistake? Vatanya Rabbi Aimer, Eini doimer timur shalavana la timur shalchama. The Mishnah said that they confused the light that they thought was the Levana. They thought it was the Chama, and it was really the Levana. And that's why if you go up high, you can confirm that it's the Chama. And we didn't even know what's the difference. So the problem is Rabbi said that the light from the moon actually comes through differently than the glow of the Chama. So it should have been easy to say the difference, to see the difference. Tamer shalavana metamer va'ila kamako. The glow of the moon shoots straight up, almost like a flashlight beam. But Timer shal Chama mavti lakan lakan. The beams, the rays of the sun radiate in all directions. So it would be easy, even when you're standing on the ground, to look up and tell if it's moonlight. If it's just one ray of light shooting straight up, I would know it's the moon. But if it's rays in all directions, I know it's the sun. So why do I need to climb up so high? Which is exactly what David Zolti said. The mistake was made on a cloudy day. So you just saw the clouds glowing. You don't know what's going on behind it. It looked light everywhere, and that's why they thought that it was the light of the sun, when it really was the light of the moon, but behind the clouds sort of spread the light that it should look like it's in all directions. Amar Papa Shmami Na, Yom Eva, on the cloudy day, Kula Shimsha. It's sunny everywhere, because wherever there's a crack in the clouds, light will come out. And the sun will be able to distribute more than in its direct path. And as a matter of fact, if you read up on suntan lotion, on sunblock, they tell you that you need to wear sunblock even on cloudy days, even on overcast days, because the sun shines through just as much. Lamai nafkamina, why do I need to know that even a cloudy day is very, very, there's a lot of sun? Someone who is putting out hides to dry, you can even put them out on an overcast day and they will dry because the sun rays shine through even stronger. Inami, another place where it's relevant, is Lichadarish Rava. Isha Shalish, a woman on Pesach, when she's kneading dough, she has to make sure to knead the dough in a place where it won't get heated up and then turn to chametz. So Lo Shalish Loy B'chama, she should not knead in direct sunlight. And she can't even use water that was warmed by the sun. And this is telling us that she shouldn't even do kneading on an overcast day, because on an overcast day, although she doesn't realize that it's sunny, in fact, it's quite sunny, and you have to be very careful. And let's stop over here. Shkoyach, everybody.